Hey, welcome to Scratching the Surface. I'm Jarrett Fuller, and this is a podcast about graphic design and creative writing. On today's episode, I am joined by the writer, editor, and publisher Perrin Drumm. Perrin is the founder of AIGA's Ion Design and was its director until last month when she left the site to take on a new role as the head of publishing at A24. This conversation was actually recorded at the beginning of the year when she was still at Ion Design, so we don't talk about her leaving and her new work, so I kind of see this episode a little bit as a exit interview of sorts, we could say. We begin the conversation talking about her early love of reading and writing, majoring in creative writing and studio art, and the origins of Ion Design, as well as the role of design criticism, how to tell larger stories than simply the kind of traditional designer profile or logo review, and how she thinks about the editorial framework for the site. In this conversation, I admit to Perrin my sort of initial skepticism of Ion Design. Its aesthetic, its kind of Instagram feed, and the vibe that it kind of initially presented itself as felt like it wasn't my style or what I was interested in reading. But as I tell Perrin in this conversation, I think they've somewhat subtly produced some really thoughtful, really serious, really deeply researched pieces of design writing, whether that's essays on design history or decolonizing design or spotlights on underrepresented areas of the design industry. And it's fascinating to hear how she thinks about this and how my kind of initial perceptions of the site were proven wrong. And just for full disclosure, I have written for Ion Design and Perrin has edited me, but I would say all of this even just as a reader, and I just had so much fun talking to her for this episode. If you're a fan of the podcast and want to help support it, you can become a member for $5 a month or $50 a year. Members get an exclusive monthly newsletter that features behind-the-scenes content, links and articles from former guests about design and writing and criticism, as well as previews of upcoming episodes. Scratching the Surface is fully supported through these memberships, so if you like the show, if you want to see it continue, if you want to help with its ongoing production, I hope that you would consider joining. Thank you as always for listening, and enjoy this conversation with Perrin Drumm. I saw that in undergrad you studied both writing and art, or creative writing and studio art, and I kind of want to go back to, 17, 18, 19-year-old Perrin and like what was on your mind at the time and what were your interests and what was it about both the art side and the writing side that was interesting to you, or what were you kind of thinking about or interested in?
Yeah. Well, I wanted to be a writer since I was in maybe second grade, and always thought I would grow up and write books and short stories. And when I got to college, I knew I would also study art as well. It's always been something that I've done growing up. My mom is an artist and a designer, so that was always part of my life. So I was deeply into writing and literature. I mean, I interned at the Paris Review, for example. I was very deep into it.
Nice.
But for my art degree, I did photography, drawing, painting, and film. And they each feed into the other. I have a home office, and half of it is dedicated to writing, and the other half is a studio space where I paint and do other things.
Oh, nice.
All sorts of things that don't see the light of day.
Yeah. I have the same thing. I was getting drinks with a friend the other night, and I was telling him about all these paintings that I have sitting right behind me right now that literally no one has ever seen. So I get it.
Yeah, I mean, we're both going to be famous artists one day. It's just bound to happen. These paintings will leave our private home offices and be on gallery walls in no time.
Right. Wait, but like, seriously, no one will ever see this stuff. Even when you were in school, was that let me ask this question a different way. You said since second grade you wanted to be a writer. You were always interested in literature. You kind of grew up in a home that had art and design. You went to school and you did both of these things. tell me if I'm reading into this, but it still sounds like writing was the thing and art was hobby, fun. Did you, you know what I mean?
Yeah, sure. I mean,
Can you talk about
sometimes,
that a little more?
yeah, I mean, sometimes if I have an idea, I feel like it's an idea for a story or a
Mm,
poem or a screenplay. And sometimes I have a thing that I want to express, and it's definitely a visual thing, and I'll do it like that. And I feel like the the art side is more relaxing and
mm,
fun, and the
mm-hmm,
writing side also very fun, but much more deliberate. And I'm thinking about it a lot harder. I mean, I still haven't given up on my dream of being a real professional writer lady one day. And it's still something that I do in the background of all the day jobs that I've had up until today. Um,
mm.
yeah, it's a lifelong thing.
I want to come back to this idea of you growing up, you still wanting to be a writer, thinking, that will be your job someday instead of, all this other stuff. But you had mentioned earlier that you saw, the painting, the photography, all of that stuff was kind of influencing each other. And can you talk a little bit about the intersection of the writing side and the art side? And look, I don't mean to make them sound like they're two opposite
Mm-hmm.
things that don't go together, but I'm interested in this idea that some stuff you think of and this is a piece of writing or this is something visual. How do those start to cross over or talk to each other? Or does something that starts as a painting or a photograph turn into a poem? How do those all start to
Yeah.
talk to each other?
I guess I've always been a visual thinker, a visual
Mm.
learner. Um, if I'm writing a story, there are certain visuals that I have in mind for it, and certain feelings I feel as I write it,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes those feelings want to be a painting. While I take a break from maybe the actual writing of it, sometimes they directly intersect. One of my projects in college was this painting that wrapped around all four walls of a studio at school, and it was very type heavy. Like, using type in art has always been really fun for me, and it was a piece that was heavily based on lettering. I mean, I guess it's how they, and and it told a story. So I guess that's,
Yeah.
but honestly, as like a viewer, I find a painting that has lots of writing and I have to read it, I find that really annoying. So I
Yeah.
did that once to kind of scratch that itch, but like, I don't know, I feel like that's really demanding of a viewer. I think when I view a painting, I kind of just want to stare at it and be lost, and I don't want to have to read anything and work too hard.
Right. So I mean, there is some like separate, both separate goals and separate desires in the consumption of these two sides also.
Yeah, I mean, it's just part of being, any kind of multifaceted person. They've got different things that they do. Someone can be a business manager, but also like be a really good gardener or a cook, and
Mm-hmm.
it's
Mm-hmm.
just different parts of their brain. There's lots of stuff that you're probably into that doesn't involve design and writing. And yeah, it's all just part of it.
Yeah. And I'm always interested in how those things that seem like they don't connect, how they do end up kind of influencing each other. I have a really kind of perhaps stupid and boring question.
Great.
Um, but I'm very interested in that term, that you studied in school, creative writing. And I still think of myself as kind of a fake writer. And, I took some writing classes in grad school,
You're
but
a real writer.
well, thank you. You're very nice. I don't have 2 degrees in writing, and all my
That's not
only
what matters.
my but what the question that I'm asking is, can you tell me like what those degrees look like? Like, what do you actually do? Like, is it
Yeah.
just you sit around a table and write things and then talk about them with each other?
Yeah, I mean, it's the same kind of crit session that I think a design student might experience for both my undergrad and my graduate program. Studying writing means that you are in a class with a bunch of other students, and there's an assignment to work on a specific aspect of writing, or you have a writing prompt, whatever it is. You go away, you write your thing, you bring it back, the class reads it, and you do a crit session. And you pay attention to tone and voice and diction and syntax and timing and all these other things, the way that in a design crit you would look at form and color and composition and whatever. And you go around the room and everyone does the compliment sandwich thing, and then you go back and you revise and then you write something new.
And I know that your MFA was specifically in fiction, right? Was the undergrad writing, was that both fiction and nonfiction?
My interest was fiction, but because you're an undergrad, you study nonfiction and
both,
poetry, and I also studied screenwriting.
Okay. Can you talk about are there differences or similarities or approaches that are different when you are writing fiction versus something nonfiction?
For sure. I mean, one, you get to make everything up, which I find infinitely more interesting. The things that are similar, the things that I think studying fiction helps when writing nonfiction or doing a reported piece or doing a piece of journalism, is that you gather the facts and all of your research and you put that all on a page, but really what you're looking for is the story, the scene that you can set at the beginning to get the reader engaged, the character that you're looking at. It's like the way that, podcasts work now, like story-driven podcasts, like This American Life or something like that. They start you in a specific story and then they expand and then you get into what the thing is about. And being a fiction writer, you're naturally attuned to those things. And I think that makes for more engaging journalism, even when you are reporting something out.
Because you kind of are learning those, you're thinking about the story just kind of innately from kind of having trained that way, right?
Yeah. When I go in to report something, I'm looking for all the narrative elements. I'm looking for the main characters and the plot and the arc and the timeline. And hopefully as a reader, that's a more interesting way to read about something than kind of person, place, thing based reporting.
I've known you, for a couple of years now, and primarily as somebody who writes in and around design. And I was going to ask you kind of where the design interest fits in, but that's already been kind of a thread of what we've been talking about with your mom being a designer and this kind of art side. How did you start writing about design or kind of get into the design world or realize that these kind of two sides could come together for you?
Yeah. I mean, personally, it had always, like you had said, it's always been part of my life. My mom is maybe my best friend. And so her interest in design has always been formative. She had a letterpress studio when I was younger, and I would always be her studio assistant.
Oh, nice.
So
that's fun.
Yeah. So I learned all about lead type and all that kind of stuff from an early age. But professionally, it started when one of my first design jobs was being an editor at the Architect's newspaper, so specifically writing about architecture. And then I went on to do corporate editorial at Condé Nast. And not my bread, like not the thing that I loved so much, but it was a really valuable and interesting experience. But sort of could not wait to get out of it and get into something different. And towards the end of that, I had been listening a lot to Debbie Millman's podcast and getting reacquainted with the design heroes that I once loved as a kid, and remembering that there was another world beyond men's fashion. I was at Details magazine at Condé And,
is Details even still a thing? Is that even still around?
No. And
I haven't heard that name in a long time.
I never shed a tear. I left before it folded when I found the job at AIGA. But I had started remembering, there's like there's a way to publish stories that doesn't involve the way that a corporate publisher would think about it. And I just was sort of rekindling my lost love of design, and was looking for a way to get back into, just to be a part of that world. And so as an editor and a writer, the way that you're part of that world is by writing about it. I knew I wasn't going to be a designer. I have no interest in being a designer. I just like to talk to them and see what they're interested in.
Yeah.
And so then I came on to AIGA.
So when you started at AIGA, Was it with the intent of starting a new, I don't even know what to call it, platform, blog, publication, or did you start more in that kind of like communication writing role, and then did the Ion design side kind of come up after the fact?
Yeah, definitely the latter. In fact, if you talk to most people who work at AIJ, their first job titles are so weird and so different from what they do now. I was talking to our chief of staff yesterday. She's been there for 14 years, Amy Chapman, and her first job title was like manager of first impressions. And she was basically the job title for working the front
Okay.
desk.
Okay.
So talk about a lofty way to talk.
Manager of first impressions.
Yeah.
I love that.
Oh, it's so funny. I've never heard that before. And all the dumb new tech job titles that exist, that one still is now my new favorite.
That's a good one.
So my job title was a lot more basic. It was just managing editor. And I think they wanted me to come in and just like clean up the website, which was not something that I was going to be content to just do. But it was, the ironic thing is that it was the very first communications job that they had hired for, at least in a long time. And, AIGA, just for anyone who doesn't know, is the oldest, largest nonprofit organization for professional designers in the United States. It started in 1914. And it was just ironic to me that an organization for communication designers had no communications department and no real mechanism for messaging what it did.
Right.
So anyways, to cut a long story short, there was a task force and they told me that AIJ was doing this great job at speaking to older and more established designers, the kind of legends, but not so much design students or early career designers. And what did I think could be done to reach them? And I did the only thing really that my professional experience had prepared me for so far, and that was to start a blog, which still a word that I hate, but what are you going to do? So I started Ion Design a couple months later in late 2014, so 5 years ago. And it started as a small blog and slowly grew over the past few years. We were able to bring in other people besides me, writers and editors. And I was eventually able to make it my full-time focus at AIGA. It was sort of my side thing until then. Although I was definitely working on it at all hours. It was my main hustle and my side hustle for a long time. Because for as many people who liked it, it rubbed many other people the wrong way, which is frankly something I've always been fine with. But I wanted to make sure that if we got criticism, it was for the content we put out and not because there was anything sloppy or unprofessional about it.
I want to talk about, I would actually like to talk about that more in a bit, but I have two other questions before we get into that. And one of the questions was about that word blog, actually, because when I was kind of looking back over old pieces on the site and even the way people talked about Ion Design a couple years ago, they referred to it as a blog, and I had never really thought about it as a blog. Can you talk about how the difference between something that is kind of more blog format and that evolution into something that is a full-fledged publication, that kind of process?
Yeah, I think blog is a totally fair term for what it originally was. And it also, it continues to have a very popular Instagram account. And that was also one of its main presences early on. And so a lot of people thought, oh, it's just a cute Instagram. And I think some people think it is still just that, which is sad, but what are you going to do? But, stuff that's bloggy in nature is maybe unreported, maybe personal, maybe more opinion-based and not an op-ed, but just a hot take on something that's, I think the misconception is sometimes that something that's a blog is written more quickly, which can be the case. It's not maybe as... if you're thinking about a proper journalistic outlet, you've got long-term goals, you have ongoing stories that you want to tell across a category, not just what's new this week, what can I pump out really quick, what's a press release that I can turn around and spit out. You're thinking about more, not just long form, but I mean, for an example, now we've expanded our coverage to things like design and diversity, design and
Mm-hmm.
sexuality, mental health,
Mm-hmm.
education, politics, money, business, a couple other things. And so when we think about the stories that we want to tell in those categories, we're not thinking from story to story. We're thinking across the span of a few years and thinking about, well, diversity is a main focus. And what are things of concern now? What are we anticipating is going to be of concern in 6 months, in a year? And what's the kind of arc that we want to show over the course of that time?
I don't mean for you to kind of like go back and
Yeah.
retrospectively tell this history or kind of uh, connect the dots, but I'm interested in that expansion and basically what came first. Was it that Instagram presence gained popularity, you getting traffic to the site, it was like now we can hire more writers, this was kind of growing, or was there always an ambition that this was going to be more than a blog, whether it was you or AIGA, as an organization saying there's more to this? You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I always wanted it to be more than what it first started as. I wasn't
Okay.
sure how it would grow. I mean, AIGA, the way that it's set up, was an organization that totally confounded me when I joined. And that's not a criticism of AIGA. It's a comment on my lack of experience before that. I had only worked in editorial platforms at magazines, on websites. So to go from someplace where the primary output wasn't something editorial, where it wasn't fast paced, where you go to AIGA and a lot of other companies like this, where it's a lot of people working slow and steady on programs. And I
Mm-hmm.
was like, what is a program? What is that? Like, I was so used to thinking like we have magazine issues, we have articles that go up on a site, and everything else supports that. And now everything was flipped. The website, anything that was communications based, was supporting the projects and the programs and the events, and it like took some rewiring of my brain to figure out how I was
Right.
going to operate and how this would live in that world. uh, I didn't know that it would turn into doing events, that it would become so much bigger. I didn't have aspirations that it would become, I think, to cover more serious topics. I didn't have that aspiration at
Right.
first. I thought it would be more about individual designers and creativity, but that got boring and small really, really
Yeah.
fast. And
Yeah.
the editors and writers that I had were the ones who were pushing me to tell more important global stories that were broader. And I think that has now become our strength, to look at places where design intersects with the other issues that all of us care about.
I mean, I think you're exactly right. And I think it's interesting to kind of hear this origin story. And even, you're talking about some people thinking that it's just this kind of cute Instagram account is, I think, very quietly, you have somehow turned Ion Design into the graphic design especially, but we could even use design more broadly, the publication where these topics are being talked about. And I don't know if there are even any others, embarrassed for me to say that publicly, that are kind of tackling these things. And all the old design printed magazines have
Mhm.
basically closed down. A lot of the blogs from the first wave of blogging are dead or dying, or kind of chugging along slowly. And you've kind of created this new thing that's feels both modern and fun and serious and worldly.
Thanks.
I don't know if that was
Appreciate
a
it.
question other than a compliment, I
I'll
guess.
take it.
I mean, I talked to Rick Pointer, who just went on and on with praise uh,
Oh my
for
God,
the
made me blush from ear to ear.
he
So
he
happy.
loves what you're doing. But I think the like cute Instagram uh facade, I guess, is, and I kind of want to lead into what you're talking about, of like the controversy or the criticism, and hear about your side of that. But what's interesting to me is, I think the for lack of a better word, cuteness of the site actually sometimes hides the serious reporting and the kind of serious topics that you're talking about. And I think I was always surprised because, admittedly, I had discounted Ion Design for a long time, thinking that it was, we're featuring all the famous designers that you've heard about already.
Mm-hmm.
We have this like, pink background with these eyes that are blinking everywhere. Nothing against the design, but it gave a vibe that was like, this isn't really the kind of writing that I'm into.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not true. There's actually a lot of great, right? It's like, where I get most of my kind of design writing. How do you think about that? How do you think about both the balance of that kind of fun, light visual with the serious topics, but then also the range of topics? Because you still do have those kind of fun, satirical, funny, little bit sarcastic pieces, and all of that can kind of sit together. How do you think about housing all of that?
Yeah. Well, from the start, we definitely wanted to differentiate ourselves from what was out there. And what was out there was mostly academic design writing that felt very insidery and exclusive, and or was written in a language that, or a tone of voice that was maybe not accessible to a younger audience, and especially an increasingly non-English as a first language speaking audience, as our community becomes more and more global. And it felt, some of that writing was, very important and groundbreaking at the time, and it started to feel a little elitist. So we wanted to distinguish ourselves there. Also, the pink color was mainly because when I was a kid, the most attractive thing on the newsstand to me was the Financial Times, just because it was pink.
Yeah.
And I remember buying it once at an airport when I was 12, thinking this is going to be a really fun kids thing. And it was the Financial Times. And I was so disappointed, but I really made an effort to read it anyway.
That's amazing.
Because I thought, okay, it's on pink. There's got to be a sense of humor there. And, there wasn't.
Right.
But I don't think that serious writing means that you can't also have fun. A person isn't all serious all the time or all, silly all the time. And certainly for me, I have serious ambitions for the site, but I have a sense of humor. I did my thesis in grad school on satire. I think satirical writing is often more poignant than straight up journalism. And if you're a regular reader of a site, you want a certain tone consistency, but I think it's nice to be surprised, and it's nice to have a break and have something that's lighter, or maybe it's just about a cool project and maybe you learn some new insights there, or maybe it's a story that we've written purely on a lark.
And I don't mean to say, I hope that didn't come across as your site is poorly designed and doesn't match.
No, it's okay. I have heard all of the criticism about the site. It's all right.
I had kind of assumed or wondered if there was some strategy in almost, I don't want to say tricking the reader, but, catching them with something fun and visual and light, and then they stick around and find the serious stuff. It's an easier way in that way than that kind of other writing. And it's completely different than basically anything else AIGA had put out at the time too. And so it was this nice kind of new entry point, perhaps.
Yeah, that differentiation was important too, to make it seem like a fresh new thing from the organization. Certainly wasn't trying to trick anyone. I think either.
Right. It's not the right word, but
I know what you mean. I wasn't trying to lure them in with the potential of sweet candy stories and then be like, gotcha, you're going to get a serious piece that's fully reported with data analytics. But more to show that, that I don't know, that it's not one thing or another. I really just wanted it to look fresh and interesting for the designers that we were looking to speak to, mostly designers who are under 35, something different than they'd seen before, something that didn't look like, a typical black on white website. There were no ads. There was a lot of open space. And there were, there's fun Easter eggs on the site, which designers really like to find. Yeah,
Yeah. I find the floating eyes kind of annoying, just
oh,
to be honest.
I know. So many people hate them. I love them. They're not going anywhere. I love when you leave it up for a while. It just covers in eyes. People hate that.
I know. It's my least favorite part of the site. I just have to tell you.
Too bad.
But let me ask you this question this way.
Okay.
Thinking about all this, thinking about the site as this, almost person with all of these different personalities, and it can be funny and serious and thoughtful and light. Do you have a editorial framework or a point of view, or could you define or describe what makes an Eye on Design story an Eye on Design story?
Yeah, definitely. We are looking at stories that are specifically at that intersection between design and something broader, whether it's design and politics and business and education or whatever it is. And we're looking to use any story or any project or issue as a jumping off point to tell something that's also more broad. So we wouldn't necessarily, write about a specific project or a campaign or like a logo unless there was a broader, bigger story to be told there. Whether it's about something light, like a trend or a new technological innovation, or whether it's something bigger, like, its impact on gender representation in the industry. We definitely want to treat designers as people who have interests and opinions and expertise well beyond the scope of their everyday work, and to tap into that and see how they think about those things and how they come at those things from their very specific point of view. I think our editors and writers find a designer's point of view on the world very interesting and uniquely suited to thinking about it in a creative and a strategic way, and that maybe other kinds of professions aren't so much. I think the way that a designer would think about a larger social issue is different than the way a business manager or a musician or a chef would. And it's that point of view and those insights that we're really interested in uncovering. And so that means that we are often in touch with lots of designers and companies, not to get a specific story out of that one conversation or interaction, but just to see, what are you working on? What are you thinking about? And what do you think about this? And what do you think about this? And just that we don't treat new design projects as these isolated incidents that don't add up to anything bigger about the industry. I think that's treating design work in piecemeal and not connecting it to the larger whole is one of the things that I think, and we've talked about this before, that holds back the design industry from becoming a bigger player. And it has to do with the way that design writing specifically is often either narrow or it's academic, but it's usually really niche. And I don't think it's serving anyone but beyond that really niche audience. And you can't grow when you do that.
I have like the flip side of that question now, because now you're making me think about that nicheness. This is also something that you and I have talked about before, but just the smallness of the design profession. And I'm curious how you think about being critical and maintaining some sort of journalistic independence and calling out things when they need to be called out, and that this isn't just like you mentioned earlier when you were talking about blogging, this isn't just a PR machine. How do you do that? I guess is the question.
One of the biggest things that we do when we see something that we're critical of is just to not cover it. And I think our absence of coverage when maybe every other site is covering it speaks to that. Sometimes we don't cover something, not because we're critical of it, because we're small and we don't have the time. But if it's a really big thing and we're not talking about it, it may be because it's not, what I'll say is it's not helpful to be critical if you're just doing a takedown. I don't think that critique is useful if it doesn't offer some kind of takeaway or some kind of insight that another designer could take and think about. If it's just pointing out the flaws of something, that's not helpful to the designer or to the industry, in my opinion. And when we do find that something is worthy of critique and we can write about it in a way that shows that so that other designers maybe don't repeat that mistake or can learn from it, then we don't hesitate to. And that means that sometimes we burn bridges, and we're willing to do that if we feel strongly about something.
Right.
The other way that we express our criticism of the industry or of specific projects or whatever is by our new focus on original reporting. And so today we released a 3-month or 4-month long survey that we did on gender representation at design
Yeah.
conferences. So that's an example. We could be critical and just say there's not enough representation at design conferences. Here's some reporting that we did. We go beyond that to do a really, really deep dive into the numbers, to pull them together. These aren't numbers that other people are collecting. We speak to many of the conference organizers to see where they might have gone wrong, or what advice they might have if they do have really good representation that other event organizers or schools or organizations that are looking to increase the representation can take. So I guess that's maybe more of our form of criticism.
So a couple of years ago, you started a print publication,
Yes.
or a kind of a printed component to this, and I'm curious why start a print magazine in, what was it, 2018, and how is that different, or how does that kind of sit beside what is happening online?
Mm-hmm. The daily, weekly clip of publishing stories on the site means that you don't often get to stop and think more broadly or more long term, maybe. And starting a magazine, first, we're in the design world. We are editors. We love magazines. Our audience loves magazines, love printed things. And we're really excited by the way that a physical bound paper format would lend itself to a different kind of writing. And that means often longer form writing, more flexibility with visuals, what we can do than what you can see on a computer screen. The opportunity to work with a different graphic designer for each issue to see how they might interpret a theme. All of our issues are themed, for example. And taking a theme and then seeing how deep we can go there in the graphic design world. That's not something that we can really do on the website in a concerted way. And so it was as much a creative exercise as it was an intellectual one for
Right.
us.
Yeah.
And also, I think it was also we launched the pilot the same time that we launched our iDesign conference, and it was really a time when we stopped and said, we're not just a cute Instagram handle, we're not just a cute pink blog. We have things to say. We are smart people, and you should listen to us. And so we did a 1-day conference in Minneapolis along with the AIGA Bigger Design Conference, and we launched a pilot magazine that day just to test out the appetite for it. And then in January of 2018, we launched our first official issue. And it really has become our calling card to show that we, this pink blog that you may have discounted, there's actual thinking done here, and here it is in your hands. And it's been, to look at it purely as a branding exercise would be to undercut it. But as far as that's gone, it's been very successful. It's become our calling card.
Yeah, that's interesting. So what's next then? Are there other, you're doing the website, you're doing the printed magazine, you're doing events and conferences. Are there other avenues that Ion Design could go into, or that you want to take it into, or that it is kind of, you and your team are kind of thinking about moving to? Where's this go next?
So there's 2 major things that we're doing this year that I'm really excited about. On the print side, we espouse experimental design and design at the fringes. And so we are getting a little bit more experimental with our print offerings. We'll be doing one larger annual issue towards the end of the year. and then creating a couple experimental fun zine projects throughout the year that I'm really
Oh,
excited
cool.
about. And then the other thing that we're doing, which ties back into the kind of design journalism as advocacy route that we've been taking more of these past 2 years, is that we're launching something called the Eye and Design Collective, which is a one-stop shop for early career creative professionals. So designers, illustrators, art directors, anyone working in the visual world, really, where they can go to get practical tips and advice and resources for all the non-creative parts of their work life, meaning things like, how do I set my rates? How do I negotiate those rates?
Oh,
How can I
nice.
protect my work or my IP? Tax season is coming up. Help. How do I get my work in front of that art director that I love? And if I do, how do I approach them? Basically, everything that you need to know to take your career to the next level. We've done some events around this the past couple of years and have found that most designers of all levels have the same pain points when it comes to running their creative practice, whether they're freelancers or run a small studio or work in-house or at an agency. And there are some resources out there. Some of them are dated, or maybe they're written in a way that basically requires a translator. And so we want to make that necessary information easy and maybe even fun for people to have access to and understand. So that's something that, I mean, I guess when you're reporting on the design world, sometimes reporting on an issue is enough. And we've done a lot of reporting on labor rights and workplace rights. And then sometimes not enough is getting done about it. And so we feel like we have to do something. We
Right,
get really
right.
annoyed, and then we say, okay, we're going to do something about it. And then we have to follow through. So we're launching this in March. It'll be free to AIGA members and available for a very affordable, low monthly fee for non-members. And it'll expand over the course of the year to include things like a community board and private access to an online database, and access to design accountants and design lawyers and the people that you need to talk to when you have the least amount of time to figure out how to get access to them. We hope that this is a place where people can go and get support.
Yeah, I love that. That's such a great idea. And it's interesting. So it's, I don't mean to turn this into a pitch for the Ion Design Collective, but so it will be an AIGA benefit if you were a member, but then you could also just subscribe to you could just become a member or, pay a monthly fee to the collective.
Correct.
Is that what you said?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's so interesting. It kind of relates to my next question. I have kind of two questions to wrap up. And you mentioned very early on in this conversation that you still have this dream that you will be a writer and not all of these other jobs. And it strikes me that so much of your job now is somewhat business focused, I imagined, and kind of strategy and thinking about all of these things. How do you kind of think about or find that that balance or intersection between just doing the writing, being the writer, doing the kind of writing work that you want to do with all of this other stuff that you're doing? How do you kind of think about how those two sit next to each other?
Man, you've just asked the question that I've been asking myself for the last couple months.
I'm asking you what I think about all the time now too.
Well, when my job started becoming more and more business related, at first I was real like putting on the brakes, like, oh my God, this is going to be all business. There's not going to be anything creative about
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And I was a little hesitant to get into it. But now that I am into it, what I've realized is that I still get to work with the same amazing team of people doing the same projects. I may not be writing the articles, but I'm running the department that allows the writing of the articles to happen. And what it does, that is this magical thing, is that during the day, a certain side of my brain is flexed, which leaves the creative part of my brain totally unused by the end of the day and fresh and ready to write or paint or do whatever else. Whereas before, I was using all of my creative energy on writing design stories and had nothing left for myself. So it's actually ended up striking a really sort of healthy balance for my own practice.
Oh, see, that's interesting. You're a stronger person than I am, because I spend my days doing that administrative work, and then by the end of the day, I'm like, I just kind of want to watch TV and put on another movie.
Well, I mean,
I don't want to.
I do that too. It's not like I'm working till midnight every night in my painting studio, painting a masterpiece. But I find at the end of the day, I'm tired of one kind of work and ready for another kind of work.
Yeah. Can you say anything about that other kind of work? Are you writing anything fun for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always writing lots of short stories that I occasionally send out to lit journals and stuff. But the bigger project that I'm working on is a book about the feature film that my husband directed last year called The Sound of Silence. And it will be a very deep dive into the world of the characters of the film as well as the making of the film. And I think will be a very beautiful design object as well.
So it will be a book about the movie, not a book based on the movie.
Right. So,
okay. Interesting.
So the first part is about the world of sound that the character lives in, the background of sound, and how sound is this like invisible force in our lives that a lot of us don't realize the impact of. And then the second part, the larger part of the book, is the making of story.
Oh, interesting. That's so interesting. It's like a beautifully shot movie. For a movie that's all about sound, the visuals are stunning in it, just by the way.
Thanks. I will tell my husband, and for anyone listening, you can go to Hulu and stream it now.
I have one more question. My last question is the question that I use to wrap up all of these conversations. And you said very early on that you, from a young age, wanted to be a writer and was always interested in literature. And so we spent a lot of time talking about writing. I'm kind of curious about the reading side. What are you reading right now? Are you reading anything interesting that you're really enjoying?
Yeah. Let's see. I just finished 2 books. I finished the Beastie Boys biography.
Oh, nice. Is it good?
Yeah, it's great. I was a really big Beastie fan in high school, and even for the talent show,
wow,
2 friends performed as the Beastie Boys. So that's a secret nerdy bit of my past that I won't say any more about. And I also just finished...
We're revealing a lot of secrets on this podcast today.
The worst part about the performance was that right as we were about to go on, the sound cut out in the auditorium, so we had to scream the rap. It was awful.
Oh,
but
my.
So much fun. I also just finished reading Jenny Slate's new book, Little Weirds, which I really enjoyed. And then I have like a stack of 8 novels by my bedside. So
yeah,
short story collections. I just finished Joyce Carol Oates' Masterclass on Masterclass. And so I've been reading some of her stuff and some Flannery O'Connor and like original stuff that any writing student would have read a million times in their writing class, just revisiting some of those old masters. This
was such a great conversation. I feel like we've been trying to do this forever.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad that we got to do it. I love your work. Eye on Design is my favorite cute pink blog.
Thanks, Jarrett.
Thank you so much for being on the podcast. This was so fun.
Thanks, Jarrett.
This episode was recorded on January 16th, 2020. Our theme music is by Andy Borgasani. We're on Twitter and Instagram at Surface Podcast. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts and at scratchingthesurface.fm. Thanks for listening.